I traveled back to the day he confessed to me. The young man wore a white shirt, his eyes gentle. I like you. The next second, I heard his inner thoughts. She really believed it? Disgusting. Ding. This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. The cicadas were chirping in the camphor trees, and people around were making a commotion, the kind that's just for laughing at others. Someone nearby whistled and said with a laugh, "Looks like Miller's taste has gotten a bit bland lately." The young man in the white shirt ignored them, standing in front of me with gentle eyes. The sunlight passing through his shoulders made him look like a prince charming from a fairy tale. James Miller leaned against the handlebars of my bicycle, bending down to look at me, his warm breath falling on my face. He said, "Emily Smith, I like you." I saw myself reflected in his eyes, a frail girl wrapped in an oversized school uniform, slightly anemic. This was what I looked like at 17. I was still standing there in a daze, my face burning red without even needing to look, my fingertips trembling. After all, this was James Miller, whom I had secretly loved for so long. Before I could utter "I like you too," I heard the inner thoughts of the clean-cut young man in front of me. She really believed it? Disgusting. I froze for a moment, looking up at James. He was smiling gently, showing no sign of the disgust in his heart. He was waiting confidently for my answer. After all, everyone in N High School knew I was James's devoted admirer. I pressed my lips together, took a step back, and said in a trembling voice, "I'm sorry, I don't like you." James' expression instantly turned sour. Just then, a white-haired young man swaggered by, tall and lazy, as if he hadn't noticed the scene here. I recognized him, our school's bully, and also James Miller's arch-nemesis. I pointed at the white-haired bully and said to James, "I prefer that type, you know?" I gripped the handlebars of my bicycle and shook them. "So, James Miller, get out of my way." James must have been stunned, not quite understanding how the girl, who had eyes only for him a second ago, was now telling him to get lost. He stiffly put his hand on my handlebars, his brow furrowed with intense unease, and pressed his lips together as he asked, "What's wrong with you?" Men are naturally much stronger than girls, and with him holding on, I couldn't move the bicycle at all. Sweat anxiously slid down my forehead, but in the next second, someone effortlessly took my handlebars with one hand, easily breaking James' grip. "Didn't you hear? She told you to get lost." The voice was cold and tired, with a hint of hoarseness. I looked up. The bully's profile was striking, his short hair dyed silver white gleaming in the light, looking extremely cool and aloof. The next second, I heard the school bully's panicked inner thoughts. "Damn, she's looking at me." The school bully rescued me from James Miller's confession, pushing my pink bicycle forward. A passing underling teased him, "Chris, when did you stop riding your motorcycle?" The school bully kicked the guy and cursed, "Get lost." I followed beside him, feeling uneasy. Gathering my courage, I spoke up, "Hi. Chris Anderson." I was stunned for a moment before realizing he had said his name. He lowered his eyes and asked very softly, "Do you like me?" I instinctively wanted to shake my head, but then I heard his sinister inner thoughts. "Those who use me as a shield end up in concrete pillars." My head immediately changed direction, and I nodded vigorously several times. Chris had almond-shaped eyes, now curved in a smile. He stopped walking and reached out to touch my face. His thumb grazed the mole under my eye, and he drawled, "From now on, you'll do my homework, come watch me play ball, take me to and from school. Whatever you did for James Miller before, you'll do for me, but 10 times better. Got it?" I was a bit confused and asked, "What do you mean?" He condescendingly patted my face, "It means I'm accepting your pursuit of me." Chris, with his dyed silver hair, earrings, and a face that screamed high maintenance. Suddenly, I felt that going back to continue my battle with James Miller might be the better option. I returned home following the path in my memory. This was the villa area. I wasn't brought back from the countryside until I was 17. And at 17, I didn't understand many things. For instance, why my mother was the original wife, yet I had a half-sister, Olivia Smith, who was a few months older than me. Everyone loved Olivia, including James Miller. James and Olivia had been childhood sweethearts. Even his initial kindness towards me was to persuade me to donate one of my kidneys to her. If it weren't for Olivia's illness, the Smith family would never have thought of bringing me back. To them, I wasn't a person, I was medicine. But now, their intentions hadn't been revealed yet. Olivia, who was recuperating at home due to illness, was still watering flowers in the garden. Hearing me enter, she looked up with a gentle smile. "You're back so late, we've already finished dinner." It didn't matter, I didn't have the right to eat at the table anyway. James Miller confessed his feelings to me today. The watering can suddenly slipped from her hand, water splashing on her face. She forced a smile. "Is that so?" "Congratulations." I raised an eyebrow in surprise and asked. Of course I didn't accept. How could he be good enough for me? In an instant, I was overwhelmed by numerous malicious and hateful thoughts, all coming from the usually kind Olivia. A human kidney bag, not grateful to us, how dare she say such things? James only told me he would get close to Emily, he didn't say he would confess to liking her. This vicious girl must have seduced him. "Emily Smith, you should look in the mirror, you're ugly and flat." I curved my lips into a smile. They still thought they could use me to save her life? Dream on. I ran upstairs, hearing Olivia break into violent coughing behind me. As I went up, the relatively friendly housekeeper stopped me and said in a low voice, "The madam instructed not to save any dinner for you." I nodded. It was a common occurrence. As I turned, I paused, hearing the housekeeper's thoughts, "Poor thing." Before I came back, it was just when Olivia Smith had successfully recovered and been discharged from the hospital thanks to my kidney. James Miller had promised me that it would be the time he'd get engaged. Little did I know that he did get engaged, but not to me, to Olivia Smith instead. He endured his disgust and aversion, pretending to care for me, a country girl he looked down upon, for so long, and finally got what he wanted. On the day of his engagement, he held Olivia's waist and said to me in front of many guests, as gently as when he confessed, "Emily Smith, do you want to look in the mirror?" I looked down and saw my swollen figure reflected on the spotlessly clean floor. A stark contrast to Olivia's slender and bright form. Perhaps it had always been worlds apart. At that moment, I felt my heart shatter into pieces. Fortunately, I woke up from the dream and returned to the time when James Miller had just confessed to me, and even unlocked a skill to hear people's thoughts. I opened my phone under the pillow, and as soon as I clicked on the chat app, there were 99 plus messages. I only had one pinned conversation, and it was James Miller. At 17, I truly liked him. James' messages kept popping up, probably because he was very angry. "Emily, I'll give you one more chance, my confession is still valid. You're deliberately trying to anger me, aren't you? Well, you've succeeded. Stay away from Chris Anderson, he's no good." There were several missed calls, and scrolling up, I saw all the messages I had sent him. Usually, I would send a string of messages, with no response from the other side. Occasionally, when James replied with one sentence, I would be happy for half a day. And now, James was continuously sending me messages. I quickly blocked him with one click. Then I leisurely entered the grade group chat, and sure enough, they were discussing the afternoon's events. The school heartthrob and the school bully fighting over a girl, a boring headline. There were even photos from the scene. I clicked on one and looked at it, my face suddenly turning red. In the photo, a silver-haired young man had almost pulled the girl into his arms. He reached over her to grip the bicycle handlebars, raising his eyes to look challengingly at James across from him, even raising an eyebrow. The comments were flooding in. Who is this girl anyway? Even the celebrity-like beauty queen from the neighboring school couldn't win over Chris. Usually, he doesn't allow us to post any photos of him. But today so many were posted and he didn't say anything. Looks like it's real. I exited the chat, and just then, there was a new friend request. The username was C.A, with a note, "Emily Smith's suitor." My heart skipped a beat as I clicked accept. The system message showed, "I've accepted your friend request, now we can start chatting." The other side paused for a moment, then sent a voice message. He said, "Just friends?" I wanted to pause the voice message, but fumbled and accidentally clicked on video call instead. The other side answered, and a handsome face appeared on the screen. He leaned in exceptionally close, as if his eyelashes could brush against my face. I unconsciously moved the phone further away. Then I heard a low chuckle coming from the screen. Chris laughed and said, "Why are you blushing when you're on a call with me?" I struggled to speak for a while. Then I heard someone shouting in the background on his side, about to crowd in. "Chris, we want to see your girlfriend too." It's all over the forum. Chris didn't even turn his head, just snorted a laugh and said, "Get lost." He reached out his hand to cover the screen, as stingy as a child hiding a toy. It was quite childish. After a while, Chris moved his hand away, the corner of his lips curling up. You couldn't resist video calling me after being apart for a while. "What, did you miss me?" His enunciation was light, almost bewitching. I was about to explain when suddenly, my stomach growled loudly. I was hungry. Before he could react, I quickly pressed the red hang-up button and buried my head in my hands. How embarrassing. It's already evening, and there's a curfew at the Smith house. I can't go out, and they didn't leave any dinner for me. I searched the entire room but can't find any snacks or bread. I have no choice but to lie on the bed and wait it out. Outside the window, there's a tall camphor tree. If it weren't for this tree blocking the view and sunlight, I wouldn't have been given the south-facing room. The leaves rustle, and I hear a gentle knock on the glass. I look up to see a silver-haired young man clinging to the branches of the camphor tree, quite recklessly. One hand lightly taps the window, while the other holds a full bag. I quickly get up and open the window in disbelief. The night wind rushes in like wildfire. Before I came back, I heard that Chris Anderson had gone for Special Forces training after graduation. His physical fitness is indeed top-notch. Chris hands me the bag, his beautiful fingers distinct. He curls his lips and says softly, "Dear Miss Emily, it's Chris's delivery service." He adds in a low voice, "Would you consider giving a 5-star review?" In the end, who's chasing whom? Chris. The next day, Chris gave me the answer. It was indeed me chasing him. Not only did I have to wait for him to go to school, but I also had to run errands for him during breaks and even cheer for him when he played basketball. I brought 2 bottles of sports drinks for Chris, as a thank you for his delivery last night. I slowly walked to the school gym, only to find it packed with people, especially girls. They were calling out Chris and James. It was a basketball game between Class 1 and Class 3, and these two happened to be in those classes. I walked towards Chris, but someone blocked my path. James stood right in front of me. His disgusting comment from yesterday still stung. His expression softened slightly as he reached for the drink in my hand. It used to be like this. I'd bring him water when he played, make notes when he studied, and occasionally he'd throw me a bone. James said, "Since you brought me water, I'll forgive you for yesterday." I avoided his hand and lowered my eyes. "Excuse me." He froze in place. I took a few quick steps towards Chris, who was not far behind him, and handed him the drinks. Chris squinted, seemingly in a good mood for some reason, and said lazily, "Oh my, I can't open the bottle cap." I resignedly took back the drink, twisted off the cap, and handed it back to him. Chris tilted his head back for a sip, his Adam's apple bobbing. He sneered in the direction behind me, and suddenly I heard his thoughts. Chris was thinking, "TCH, I hate people who assume too much." I turned around to find James still standing there, looking a bit flustered. His lips were pressed into a line, and when he saw me looking, his dark eyes turned away. He was angry, and that made me happy. Chris was in top form, unstoppable on the court, dominating the game and causing waves of screams to erupt in the gymnasium. In contrast, James was unusually distracted, frequently glancing towards our section in the stands, essentially getting destroyed on the court. Chris's class won without any suspense. As the game ended, Chris walked towards me, his face beaming with confidence. I handed him the water bottle. He leaned down, crooking his finger, and I obediently moved closer, feeling his hot breath envelop my face and neck. Chris drawled, "Watched my game." "Nothing to say?" I blinked, while the girls beside me had been shouting "Chris is so cool" for half an hour. I looked up at him and hesitantly said, "Chris is so cool?" The next second, a jacket was thrown over my head, plunging me into darkness. It was Chris's school uniform jacket that he had set aside before the game, carrying a faint scent of soap. I heard someone exclaim, "Chris, why are your ears and face so red? Did those guys from Class 1 play dirty and hurt you?" Chris gritted his teeth. "Shut up." Life became much easier when it didn't revolve around James Miller. My impression of Chris was still stuck on that time when I came out of a convenience store and stumbled upon him fighting with some guys from the neighboring school. I was so scared that I crouched on the ground, afraid of getting caught in the crossfire. I only dared to look up when it got quiet. Only Chris was left standing, leaning against the wall, looking at me with an ambiguous smile. I was terrified. Chris asked, "Do you have a Band-Aid?" I did. After a moment's hesitation, I approached him and handed one over. He extended his hand, showing a small scrape on his fair skin, expecting me to apply it for him. Chris looked down and asked, "For men high school?" I nodded. "Which class?" "What's your name?" Afraid that the school bully might seek revenge later, I gave a vague answer. "The one who's always liked James Miller." That wasn't entirely untrue. At N High School, people might not know Emily Smith, but everyone probably knew James's simp. Just as I was about to peel off the Band-Aid wrapper, Chris suddenly withdrew his hand. His expression turning cold, not interesting. I didn't know which part of what I said had angered him. As he walked away, his figure looked somewhat thin and unsteady. But now, as I interacted with Chris, I found him surprisingly docile. Even when angry, he was easy to appease. James Miller, on the other hand, always seemed unpredictable to me. When he was nice to me, I felt like he truly liked me, but when he was cruel, it was genuinely vicious. Fortunately, I probably wouldn't have much to do with him anymore. However, after school, James showed up at the Smith residence. I was going downstairs to get my study guides when I saw Olivia happily running out of the music room. Her tone half complaining, half coquettish. "James, you haven't come to see me in so long." James was silent for a moment before asking, "How's your recovery going?" Olivia chattered on, "My health is just a burden to Mom and Dad, but I'm fine, don't worry. I'll ask the housekeeper to cut some fruit you like." "Yesterday." James interrupted her, pressing his lips together, "No need." He looked up towards the stairs, making direct eye contact with me. He said while looking at me, "I'm here to see Emily." Olivia froze, as if she hadn't heard clearly, and repeated, "James, who are you looking for?" James ignored her and said slowly, "Emily Smith, come down. Let's talk." Under his gaze, I slowly descended the stairs. Then picked up my essential guide for high school math dummies that I had left downstairs, right in front of him. I sighed and said, "It's not that I'm ignoring you. I'm in the middle of a video call with Chris, going over math problems. He'll be upset if I keep him waiting too long." Olivia's face turned pale. James's face darkened. That night, Olivia threw a fit, insisting on returning to school. Being the pampered child she was, and with her health improving recently, her family agreed. After her re-enrollment was processed, Olivia's mother for the first time condescended to speak to me at length. Her words were part instruction, part threat, but essentially boiled down to one thing: I was to be Olivia's servant at school. She said, "Emily Smith, don't forget, you're here because of the resources I've provided." She had always looked down on me, a country girl, never taking me seriously. My father had built his fortune with the help of her, a second-generation rich, so naturally, her status was higher. I meekly agreed. As the conversation ended, my father finally spoke up, calling my name, Emily. I turned to face him. He said, "Don't call Olivia sister at school. It's hard to explain." How could anyone explain two sisters from the same father, born just months apart? Olivia's return to school caused quite a stir. She had been absent for half a semester due to illness, but her social skills had made her quite popular before that. She was in the same class as James, and they were often seen together lately. Soon, the rumors about James and me naturally faded away. With her parents backing her, Olivia ordered me around as she pleased. Living under their roof, I had no choice but to comply. On a sweltering summer day, with temperatures reaching 104 degrees Fahrenheit, I was sent to buy popsicles for her and her friends. When I returned, drenched in sweat, I found them huddled together, giggling. That Emily, she's clearly a poor country girl. First, she was chasing after James, and now she's latched onto Chris. Emily's grades are terrible. She can't compare to Olivia in any way. James and Olivia are the real childhood sweethearts. Olivia, what's your relationship with Emily? I've never seen such an obedient dog. They burst into laughter as if they'd heard the funniest joke in the world. Suddenly, someone said, "Hey, Olivia, Emily has the same last name as you." Olivia's smile froze for a moment before quickly returning to normal. Emily is my family's maid's daughter. My father pulled some strings to get her into our school. I interrupted their praise for Olivia's family's kindness by placing the phone box of popsicles on the table. Olivia reached out to rummage through the contents, and I had a bad feeling. Sure enough, I heard her say, "Emily, they've all melted. Please go buy them again." I lowered my eyes, thinking of how to respond. Suddenly, a cool voice spoke up, unlike its usual gentle tone. James said flatly, "Olivia, you're going too far." The surroundings fell silent. Olivia looked up, slightly hurt. "James, you know she's..." She swallowed the rest of her words, suddenly unable to speak as she looked at James. I could hear Olivia's thoughts, half angry and half hurt. Olivia was thinking, why has James's attitude changed when we've been through the same things? I glanced at James, puzzled, unable to understand why he was speaking up for me now. Perhaps they had changed tactics, playing good cop and bad cop. I said slowly, "What's going too far?" "You've done the same thing, haven't you?" When I first pursued James, he was quite unpleasant, making me buy him coffee in the pouring rain. When I returned, soaked to the bone but with the coffee intact, he merely glanced at it and said, "Emily, the coffee's cold." James clearly remembered this incident as well. The atmosphere grew even colder, and no one dared to speak. In the midst of this silence, someone suddenly draped their arm lazily around my neck from behind, gently pulling me back. I fell into his embrace, enveloped by a fresh summer scent. I looked up to see Chris' playful eyes. "I was wondering where you'd been these past couple of days. Turns out you're running errands for people." Chris scanned the crowd, causing those he looked at to pale. There were still discussion threads about Chris on the school forum. His reputation as a school bully was well known. Making her run errands, Chris enunciated clearly, emphasizing each word, "Who do you think you are?" Chris laughed as he ordered the group to go for a run. They didn't dare to say a word and obediently complied. Even Olivia wasn't spared. A bunch of people drank the already melted popsicles and ran around the track under the scorching sun, attracting the attention of other students who watched from the balconies. The head teacher hurried towards the field, his half-bald head gleaming. The culprit, Chris, was standing next to me. His silver hair strikingly conspicuous as he squinted at the people below, his anger not yet subsided. "Chris," I called his name. He turned his head, and the anger in his eyes instantly melted away. "Don't do this again next time," I said weakly, my voice very soft. "It doesn't look good." It wasn't that I felt sorry for Olivia and the others, but that Chris doing this for me wasn't worth it. Since my mother's death, I've been mostly self-reliant. No one has ever been this nice to me. Although Chris reportedly did worse things in the past, such blatant rule-breaking would definitely have a negative impact on him. Chris rested his chin on his hand and leaned closer to me, so close that I could count his eyelashes. I saw my reflection in his eyes. "Does it make you feel better?" he asked. I was stunned for a moment. "Yes, it does." Chris curled his lips and tapped my forehead with his knuckle. "Then the impact is pretty good." After Chris's intervention, Olivia didn't dare boss me around anymore. The name Chris Anderson scared her so much that she didn't even complain at home. Maybe my words had affected James, as he stopped bothering me too. Occasionally, I'd see James and Olivia walking together at school. Olivia would look at James with tender affection one second, and then glare at me with disgust the next. She had a talent for face-changing like in opera. But James didn't seem as enthusiastic about her as I had imagined. However, none of that mattered to me anymore. I only had one task: to study hard. Recently, I might have added another one: helping the underachieving student, Chris, with his studies. On the day the monthly exam results were posted, people crowded around the bulletin board. My grades weren't very good before, but during those days lying in the hospital bed before I traveled back in time, I had been reading high school textbooks, hoping that one day I could retake the college entrance exam. So this time, I was also looking forward to my ranking. Olivia and her friends were at the front of the bulletin board. "Olivia, you're ranked 29th in the grade." "That's amazing!" Of course it was amazing. The Smith family hired top-notch tutors for her every day. As expected, James is still first in the grade. They turned around and saw me starting to look from the bottom of the list. They couldn't help but mock me. I heard Olivia say softly, "Some people at least know their place and where they belong." Suddenly, someone tugged at her sleeve, voice trembling. "Olivia, her ranking seems to be above yours." Just a few positions above her, Olivia stared at the bulletin board, her face pale. "Someone read out my ranking: Emily Smith, 20th place." It was even higher than I expected. I suppressed my joy and finally found Chris's name. He had jumped to the middle ranks. The Emily tutoring sessions were showing results. I turned around. Chris was walking down the corridor with a group of young mans, looking like they were heading to play basketball. Afraid he might not see me, I stood on my tiptoes and called out his name happily: "Chris." He lifted his eyelids and looked over at me. "300th place," I said, my eyes curved in excitement and pride. "You ranked 300th, Chris." Chris's footsteps faltered. The guys next to him teased him, nudging his elbow. "Chris, your girl is pretty cute, huh?" He looked at me, and in front of everyone, the school bully's face suddenly turned bright red. I heard Chris's inner thoughts, slightly flustered. He thought to himself, "Oh no, how can she be so adorable?" Many people liked Chris, but they were all deterred by his reputation as the school bully. Most of them admired him secretly, but today, one of the few who openly pursued him approached me. Sophia Rivers, the beauty queen from the neighboring school, had starred in a few moderately popular youth dramas. I heard that Chris had once gotten into a fight for her, but for some reason, they never got together. She cornered me at the school gate early in the morning. Chris and I now go to school together. He had gone to the convenience store to buy breakfast for me, and I was waiting for him at the school gate. I didn't expect to encounter Sophia first. Sophia was very beautiful. If Olivia was a pure white jasmine, Sophia was an intense rose. "Are you Emily Smith?" she asked. I nodded. Sophia got straight to the point: "You can't win against me. Stay away from Chris. Chris may seem cold, but he's kind-hearted. Sometimes his excessive sympathy can give people the wrong idea. Besides, after what was said about you on the forum last night, if I were you, I'd be too ashamed to come to school. Chris's interest in you is just a fleeting fancy. If you persist, you'll only embarrass yourself." "Forum? What forum?" She finished speaking, but suddenly her eyes lit up. She looked behind me and called out affectionately, "Chris." Before I could react, a cup of soy milk and a bun were thrust into my hands. The silver-haired young man, with a bag of milk between his teeth, lowered his head and stuffed a handful of sugar packets into my pocket. He even zipped up my backpack that I hadn't closed properly. Chris didn't look at Sophia. He mumbled indistinctly, "What were you talking about?" I blurted out, "She said your interest in me was just a fleeting fancy." The words had a double meaning, and I blushed. Chris almost dropped the milk bag from his mouth. He turned his head menacingly towards Sophia. Chris's series of actions had been as smooth as if he had done them countless times before. Sophia stared at Chris's hand zipping up my backpack, her face ashen. "Chris, you don't even let others get too close to you. How can you do these things for her?" Chris barely lifted his eyelids and uttered two words. "Who are you?" Those who can be celebrities usually have good psychological resilience. But Chris managed to break Sophia's defenses with just two words. As we walked into the school, Chris suddenly spoke up. "I don't know her. And I've never fought for her. It's all just rumors." I was stunned for a moment before I realized that Chris was explaining himself to me. I looked up at Chris. His light-colored hair made him look even paler. He spoke lazily. I'm not like some people who liked others before they liked me. Fortunately, she came to her senses in time. The sarcasm in his words was directed at an unknown person. He raised an eyebrow at the end, cueing me, right, Emily? After the morning drama, I had a lingering sense of unease. Sure enough, as soon as I entered the school, I felt something was off. It was especially noticeable during breaks. The looks I received in the hallway were a bit strange, and I could hear whispers from all directions. Emily Smith is actually an illegitimate child. No wonder she's two-timing, it's in her nature from birth. If I were her, I wouldn't dare face Olivia, let alone go to school with her. God, it's disgusting. I realized what was happening and checked my phone in a bathroom stall. Opening the forum, I found a trending post titled "Exposing Emily Smith, the Illegitimate Child's Two-Timing Scandal." The poster was anonymous, claiming to be an ordinary classmate who couldn't stand me. They dramatically narrated my background, twisting the facts. They said Olivia's parents were the loving original couple, and my mother schemed to seduce Mr. Smith for his wealth before giving birth to me. Supposedly, she had been using me to blackmail the Smith family for years, and now sent me to high school to hook up with rich kids. The post described how pitiful Olivia was, even blaming her poor health on my mother's actions during pregnancy. It also accused me of shamelessly clinging to James and Chris. The comments below were filled with insults. I was so angry I felt dizzy. That's not how things happened at all. The truth is, Olivia's mother set her sights on my newly married father. She knowingly became the third party, and eventually, they ran off together. My father never cared for us again after that. My mother hoped for his return until the day she died. I left the bathroom and washed my face at the sink. Someone handed me a paper towel. It was James. He said softly, "I've already sent people to deal with the forum post. Don't worry." I looked at him through the mirror. The young man in the white shirt had gentle eyes. "You knew about this all along?" I was referring to the content of the post. James closed his eyes with a hint of self-loathing and nodded. "I'll suppress this matter. No one will discuss your background, so don't be upset with me. After this blows over, let's pretend nothing happened." He didn't even ask me, he just assumed it was true. He opened his eyes again, gazing at me softly. "You see, I've been helping you since the first time we met. Come back, Emily." I wiped my face dry and threw the paper towel in the trash. Turning to face James Miller, I calmly said, "James, I'm not an illegitimate child. From the first time we met, James had always been helping me. When I first came to this city, I hadn't even found the Smith family's place yet. I got lost in the Villa district and was chased around by some unknown family's large dog. My mother had died from rabies, so I've always been terrified of dogs. It was pouring rain that day. As I ran, the tattered luggage I was carrying scattered all over the ground. The dog pinned me to the ground. I was so scared that tears came to my eyes. Then I heard a whistle, and the big dog immediately got off me and ran past me happily. Wiping my tears and shaking, I gathered my pitiful belongings in the rain. Suddenly, an umbrella appeared over my head. The hand holding it had distinct knuckles, belonging to a cool-looking young man in a white shirt. For a moment, I felt ashamed of myself. "Did you chase the dog away? Did you save me?" "What's your name?" he said. "My name is James Miller." While I was living under the Smith family's roof and being ignored at school, only James was always there to help me. So I kept staying by his side. Maybe I couldn't even distinguish my own feelings, whether it was love or not. After all, from the beginning, he had his own motives. James is quite complex. Sometimes I thought he liked me, even writing his name on my textbooks. But the next second, he could erase the name he had just written with a stiff face. I always knew he despised and hated something about me, but I never knew the answer. Now I know. He always thought I was an illegitimate child, that the blood flowing in my veins was dirty. Loving James Miller is worse than loving a dog. I walked unimpeded to the classroom door and indeed saw a group of people surrounding Olivia. She was crying sadly, with people around her busy comforting her. When they saw me standing at the classroom door, they all glared at me. Fortunately, after Chris' incident last time, no one dared to verbally mock me, fearing offending the school bully. Olivia had always been outwardly gentle to me. After all, she needed something from me. But these few times, I don't know what stimulated her. First, she made a fuss about going to school, then the popsicle incident. We've basically torn off our masks now. She looked up, her eyes red, her knuckles turning white as she clenched them. Emily Smith, can you please leave our family alone? I heard her thoughts again. James just went to find her. He used to be like me, disgusted by these illegitimate children. How did it turn out like this? I leaned against the wall and laughed. Of course not. Olivia's expression froze. I walked forward, resting my hands on her desk, looking down at her. This post is twisting the facts. I'm not an illegitimate child or the child of a mistress. It's someone else. Olivia had always been kept in the dark by her parents, unaware of her parents' affairs. She really thought her mother was the original wife. Which is why she had always harbored hostility towards me in secret, leading to this misunderstanding. When I suddenly said this, she immediately refuted, "Do you have any evidence?" I shook my head and straightened up, a bit contemptuous. No evidence needed. The accuser must provide proof. The innocent don't need to prove themselves. I said, I will report this to the police. Justice will give me the answer. Did they really think they could avoid responsibility just because the post was anonymous? Her face turned pale. Before I could even call the police, justice arrived first. Someone said, the forum's anonymous function suddenly went offline. The person next to me was looking at that post on their phone, hiding it behind a book. The poster's name was clear as day, Olivia Smith. Everyone looked at Olivia strangely. They had been comforting her for so long, only to find out she was the one who posted it herself. She really had one face in public and another in private. Olivia was thin-skinned after all. With the blood rushing to her head, she actually fainted. In the VIP hospital room, Olivia had just finished dialysis and looked pale. The caregiver was bustling about, while her mother was feeding her cut fruit. I was being scolded by my father. Emily Smith, I'm truly disappointed in you. Is this how you repay us, by upsetting your sister to the point of hospitalization? He didn't mention a word about what Olivia had done. I lowered my eyes wearily, looking at the clean floor, remembering the time I was alone in the hospital. Back then, I had just donated a kidney to Olivia. And their family's attitude towards me took a sharp turn for the worse. When I first came here, I wanted to show my long-lost biological father that I was also an excellent daughter, but things didn't go as planned. Fortunately, I had long since stopped caring. I understand the situation. I heard you want to file a police report. That's nonsense. You shouldn't go back to school anymore, after all, those are Olivia's classmates, and it wouldn't be good for her. I'll arrange a transfer for you. Realizing his tone was a bit harsh, Mr. Smith softened his voice. We're all family, can't we be a little more understanding of each other? No, I said softly. Mr. Smith was stunned. This was the first time I had refused him. Say that again, he said sternly. My throat felt a bit dry. The atmosphere in the hospital room became tense. The door was suddenly pulled open without warning. A group of people crowded around a silver-haired young man standing in the doorway. He held out his hand. Emily, come here. I quickly walked towards him, asking in a low voice, why are you here? Chris put his hand on my back, chuckling, to back you up. Mr. Smith obviously knew Chris, and his expression showed a hint of fawning. I had no doubt that in the next second, he would order me to make connections for him. I let out a breath, feeling inexplicably more confident, and finally repeated. I said, no. I will file a police report, and I won't donate a kidney. Whether Olivia lives or dies has nothing to do with me. Don't bother me anymore. I turned to look at Olivia, who was in a state of panic, clutching her blanket tightly. Olivia's dislike for me stemmed from having different mothers, from James, and from jealousy of my health. I burst her long-held bubble of delusion. Olivia. Your mother was a genuine mistress. Your father was undoubtedly unfaithful in marriage. Olivia, you're the illegitimate child you mentioned in your post. After my outburst, I left the hospital room, leaving behind a mess. I sat in the hospital corridor, and suddenly someone crouched down in front of me. Chris and his people had lingered a bit longer at the hospital room door, undoubtedly cleaning up after me. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't have been able to leave so easily today. I squeezed my palm, looking into Chris's eyes. Thank you. Sunlight filtered through his brows and eyes, making them particularly clear. I hesitated for a moment, but still asked, "Why are you so nice to me?" Chris rested his chin on his hand and smiled. "Why are you being coy while just talking?" My face turned bright red in an instant. "I'm not being coy, I'm not praising you, I'm really asking for your reason, Chris." Chris furrowed his brows, as if he was really thinking about it. He said, "Does this need a reason? Some people are just naturally radiant, making others want to give them their best when they see them. The first time I saw you, I happened to see you being chased around by the Miller family's dog. It was quite special. I was the one who whistled to call the dog away. I originally wanted to come forward and get to know you, but then I saw James Miller. Seeing him irritates me, so I left. If I had known it was you, I definitely wouldn't have turned away. If he had known it was Emily, he definitely wouldn't have let someone else get ahead of him." With that turn, Emily's eyes were filled with James Miller, and she could no longer see him. He watched her run back and forth for James Miller, saw her endure grievances yet still like James Miller. Saw them fall in love, and he could only retreat into the shadows. My eyelashes fluttered. I hadn't expected that he had helped me even before James. I waited for him to continue, but he didn't say more, his almond-shaped eyes making me feel hot. "And then?" I asked. "You're in such a hurry to probe my feelings, Emily." He smirked. Chris stood up, saying as if casually, "That dog from the Miller family has always been obedient and doesn't run around. It listens well to its master." Chris took me to the police station to file a report. The forum post was still up. Apparently, Olivia had been trying to delete the post but couldn't. Just like when the forum suddenly glitched and cancelled the anonymity feature that day. The comments below had already turned against her. Chris also showed me the contents of the post, particularly displeased with the part about Me Too timing. He scoffed coldly, "What kind of lousy catch is James Miller that you'd even consider him?" The case was resolved quickly. Not only was Olivia required to make a public apology, but I also received financial compensation. It wasn't too much or too little, just enough to free me from the Smith family's control and cover my tuition and living expenses. Olivia admitted that she had been spreading rumors, which in a way was an indirect admission that she was the one with questionable origins, the real illegitimate daughter. After this incident, her condition worsened. When it rains, it pours. The Smith family business suddenly took a downturn as well. But that had nothing to do with me. I pocketed the compensation from the Smiths and sent Chris a message while sipping on a bag of yogurt. I knew justice would give me answers. What about me? I thought for a moment, then typed out a line with my head down. Chris would bring me to justice. There was no response from the other end for a long time. I put down my phone to do homework. When I remembered to check again, a new message had been sitting there for a while. Chris had sent a voice message. The young man's voice was low and husky, flowing slowly from the speaker. "Emily Smith, what should I do? I feel like you're about to catch me." Under the camphor tree, a young man in a white shirt had been standing for a long time. The dappled light fell softly on James Miller. I was passing by when he called out my name. I turned around, confused. James looked at me with a complex expression, something between relief and something else I couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry," he said, pressing his lips together. I never thought James would say those two words. He didn't seem as unapproachable as Chris, but he was more arrogant than anyone else deep down, never willing to lower his head. I patiently asked, "Is this about misunderstanding that I was an illegitimate child?" James stared at me for several seconds before answering in a low, somewhat strained voice. "For everything that happened before." Olivia had been telling me for years that she had a half-sister. I was prejudiced and believed what she said. Seeing no reaction from me, James lowered his eyes, showing a fragile, glass-like vulnerability. Have you met my younger brother? I had seen him before I came back. He was a cute little chubby young man who liked to chase after James. But James's attitude towards him was indifferent, even bordering on cruel. James was silent for a moment before revealing his own wound. He's my father's child with another woman. I belatedly realized that James's conflicted attitude towards me was just him subjectively projecting his own pain onto me. He even went as far as helping the Smith family deceive me because, in his eyes, this was what I owed them. James Miller, I suddenly called his name, my eyes curving into a smile. He looked up, holding his breath. It had been a long time since he'd seen me smile at him. I heard the bitterness in James's heart, but I really like Emily Smith. I like you, I said. As soon as the words left my mouth, I saw James's eyes light up. I sneered, you actually believed that? Disgusting. James needed to understand that some things can't be fixed with just an apology. I was returning these words to him. James stumbled, looking at me quietly and painfully. Perhaps at this moment, he finally realized what he had truly lost. Emily. A lazy voice sounded from behind me, tinged with displeasure. I hurriedly turned around. Chris was standing not far behind us, holding a strawberry ice cream cone. His almond-shaped eyes narrowed, and I felt like I'd been caught cheating by the primary partner. I no longer had time for James. I ran towards Chris. But halfway there, I slipped and crashed into Chris's arms. Chris steadied me but hissed in pain. I quickly apologized. I'm sorry, where does it hurt? Chris guided my hand to press against the left side of his chest. Under my palm, I felt his scorching heart beating rapidly and intensely. I looked up. There wasn't a trace of pain on Chris's face. Instead, he was looking down at me, his eyes filled with tender affection. It hurts here. I realized I'd been tricked. I turned to leave, but Chris gently pulled me back. He sighed, my dear Miss Emily, I understand that you have other young mans around you. But as your future boyfriend, I'm feeling a bit insecure. So, I've decided to remove one words from future boyfriend. Guess which ones? Boyfriend? Chris tightened his grip slightly and gritted his teeth, it's future. I couldn't hear his thoughts anymore, only the thunderous beating of two hearts. Neither of us spoke as the sunlight poured down. After all, we still have a long life ahead and a long way to go. After all, this is just a new beginning. Actually, Chris Anderson, the school bully of N High School. Isn't that hard to pursue?